On the latest episode of Turn It Round the Corner podcast, I've got a special guest all the way from sunny Australia, Tom Laxton, who is currently head of coaching and football at Queensland FA. Tom, how you doing? G'day.
G'day. I'm well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Nice to hear from you. Thanks for taking up the time. So, where are we now? 9 hours ahead, so it's your Friday night?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a little bit late here, bit of a time difference, but all good, going well, thanks.
So obviously we've just caught up. So if you tell the listeners where you're at and what you're doing at the moment, so you're at a tournament, is that correct?
Yes, I'm currently up at the Sunshine Coast, which is north of Brisbane, in Queensland, so on the east coast of Australia. As the name suggests, sunny coast. It's a beautiful place. And as you mentioned, working for Football Queensland, and we've got our state teams, our under-14s teams, up at a tournament at the moment where we're playing against other states from across the country. So really exciting event. It's a great place to play football. I'm sure we'll get into it in a bit, but quite different from the UK, but beautiful place nonetheless.
Lovely to hear, mate. Thought this would be a really good podcast for young aspiring footballers to listen to. I spent nearly 3.5 seasons, I think, coming out of youth football in the UK, playing in Australia, both in the Super League in Sydney and Queensland. And yeah, I just wanted to get your perspective of football, across the other side of the world and the experiences there, and obviously what you're doing in the coaching world. So let's start with your current role, mate. So you're lead club development ambassador for talent for Football Queensland. So what does that involve? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Obviously you're not at tournaments all the time. So if you could let the listeners know, what you're doing, and I suppose at the end of that, how you come to leave the UK to go and coach in Oz, because I know you had a role before that with Brisbane City, but what have you been now in Australia? Is it coming up to 10 years?
Yeah, it's coming up to that. In 2015, I moved out here, so yeah, it's gone really quickly. And as you say, working for Football Queensland, actually roles sort of changed a little bit over the last sort of 12 months, and now I'm the technical director for talent development across the state. So first things first, Queensland's absolutely massive. I think the UK can fit into it 7 times. It's massive. So when we talk about, like an FA equivalent, you really can't compare like an FA county of like Essex or Sussex or wherever it may be to Queensland. It's absolutely vast. So yeah, currently work for Football Queensland, a member federation, and our member federation is quite progressive. We do quite a lot in terms of football development. Part of my role entails working with clubs, so club development. We go into junior clubs, sort of semi-professional equivalent, and run almost like a mini EPPP, if your listeners are sort of familiar with that, where we assess clubs and sort of see how they do things and how well they're planning, how well they deliver the planning aspects of their training in their youth development. And then we also offer support as well. So we sort of see where they're at on their sort of progression, their 4-year plans or 5-year plans as a club, and we go in and offer sort of coach education. We look at their training programs and sort of holistically work together to develop the club. So that's a part of the role is working with clubs. That's more of a Brisbane focus, or working in more of the main area of Queensland, in southeast Queensland, where the density of population is quite high. And then on top of that, another part of my role is obviously the talent development. So talent ID across the state, and again, I just have to reiterate the size of the state is absolutely massive. So trying to talent ID, if you imagine trying to find a player in Belgium and comparing it to a player in Manchester, that's kind of the task we have in front of us with the size of the state. So it's a very difficult task at times, just because of the tyranny of distance we have in Queensland. But we've got some really good people working across development centres across the state. So the notion there is that we try and give all talent a chance, and we've got sort of processes and talent development sort of selections and tournaments that go on across the year to make sure that if there's a really good player miles and miles away, then they can get to a talent program that's sort of the next step for them, and eventually that leads to sort of national youth team selection, and hopefully a placement within the only professional team in Queensland, which is Brisbane Roar at the moment. So it's a big task. There's different roles and aspects, but coming from the UK, there's certainly massive differences in how youth development works. It's completely different. When I moved across in 2015, some of the things were completely shocking, I'll be honest, like completely different to what I'd seen before, but not all negative. You know, there's some really positive things that parents and players could learn in the UK from sort of experiences here. So yeah, it's a great role. I've been in the role for a number of years. Prior to that, I was a technical director at a club, Brisbane City, which is one of the bigger clubs in Brisbane. And that was a technical director role, so developing young players into the first team, a bit more of a traditional role within the club. And prior to that, I moved out in 2015 actually to finish off playing and then just sort of having one more year of playing. Bit of a change of scenery just to give it a go. And obviously fell in with the country, managed to get sponsored through Brisbane City, and that's my story really. And now I'm really happy here in Brisbane. Met my partner out here and got two lovely kids, so really well settled at the moment.
Great story, Lax. So there's a couple of, I suppose, follow-up questions off the back of that. So you mentioned the EPPP, and obviously that's very specific to academies in the UK, and how they have to deliver that coaching to children. Do you have something similar in Australia?
Yeah, that's what we've tried to put in place. So we've been in the club assessment, club development process now for sort of 3 or 4 years, and we started from ground zero where there was no sort of provision for clubs. It was basically that they signed up to a license to participate in a league, and that was it. They were given a competition to participate in, and there was no real sort of quality assurance in what they were doing. Firstly, I must say that the biggest difference between a regular club in the UK and in Australia is that there is a fee-paying system. Yep. So much like America, the players pay to be a part of clubs, which again, like to your listeners now, must sound completely alien for a talented player to have to pay. But unfortunately, the model at the moment in terms of like top-down funding isn't quite there. So it is a user pay experience at the moment. So all we're trying to do is put some quality assurance in place that parents, when they pay these fees, they know what they're getting for their money, and it's to drive up standards in the clubs as well. So I don't think it's done much across the country. Queensland's quite a progressive state, as I say, to be able to put in place quite brave measures to actually, make clubs conform and develop to high standards. And look, the clubs do a fantastic job. They really are sort of modern thinking. There's some really good technical directors and coaches out here. I think sometimes Australia is seen sometimes as a bit of a backwater of football, but we've seen, like with the progression of Andrew Postecoglou and the performance at World Cups from the Matildas and the Socceroos recently, that there is talent here, and some of the coaches coaching is at a higher level. So yeah, the EPPP was obviously well established, and I was actually part of the academy sort of set up. We can go into that in a moment in the UK, and so it's like an EPPP equivalent in Australia to set standards, but also the big thing on top of that is to actually work with the clubs and offer them support to up what they do, really, to make it a better experience for all players. So it's a bit of a strange one that grassroots football is a fee-paying sort of model, and I know that America has similar sort of issues and things, but as I say, there are some positives to it as well.
That's a question that I'll come on to after this one. Obviously, the similarities between Australia and America and something that you've touched on. But so when you was technical director at Brisbane City, a club that I know quite well. I think a club that I played at back in the days when I played at Palace.
Yeah, right.
Was the role that you was providing then was what you're trying to push now, and get to that, maybe, similarities to each other, that I take it wasn't in place then, and it was more you was doing that role just for the club and improving the individuals and the children in that club. Is that correct? Is it more a newer thing?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it sort of mirrored my move from Brisbane City into Football Queensland. So that was the first year that we started to do sort of the quality assurance, the club development and support. So, I guess I'm very fortunate that sometimes you take it for granted just how much, we live and breathe football in the UK and in England, and to some places around the world, some of our experience that seem normal are completely, seen as, very high reaching, or the standards are very high. So when I came from the UK to Australia, met some fantastic people, built a community and a network. And so what I was delivering at Brisbane City was off the back of working with some fantastic people in academies. And so basically it was just the idea of putting best practice in place for the club that I was working at, trying to develop players and get them into the first team or get them into professional, exactly the same as you would do in a UK academy. And then the time came for a change, and decided to move to the member federation, or the FA equivalent. And that's where we started to do that sort of quality assurance and EPPP equivalent sort of development. Yeah, so it was a case of just bringing across best practice that I'd already used, working with some fantastic people, and then trying to spread that knowledge with some other staff into the club assessment sort of side of things. Yeah.
Okay, mate. And now, like, you've touched on a very important point. Obviously, you said that you come out of youth football academy level, you played non-league, and then obviously end of that time you fancied something different, and you went to Australia and played football. I kind of done it the other way. I come out at 18, dipped my toe in non-league for a little bit, bumped into my old manager at Millwall, who said, there's a number of Australian clubs looking for players. Would you like to go? Very much a football geek, very much keep an eye on, I had more or less 7.5 years of playing in Australia and America, and I read a lot, I take note a lot, I still watch the A-League, I watch the MLS. And I think it was highlighted very recently about, I think it was Ibrahimovic in America, talking about the costs of soccer in the US. And obviously, Australia takes, I would say, quite a lot of their sport and route and fashion and music. I would say very, very much it comes from the US as well. And soccer in Australia is very, very similar. Obviously, I've got a family that live in Brisbane. I've got a nephew that's playing in and around that sort of level. And whenever we talk about kids soccer and the fees associated with that, it's kind of eye-watering to me, and probably to parents in the UK. Like, my boy's just come out of 4 years at Leighton Orient. He's dropped into grassroots because that's the route that I think would be best to him for a while. But he paid £100. Now, if you look at £100 for the season, someone sponsors the kit, whatever, it is what it is, right? But in Australia, when I speak to my family and my nephew, like and as I say, Ibrahimovic, done this article that it's thousands, right? It's 2,000-3,000 a child for a season, and there's lots of connotations now that soccer in America and in Australia is becoming what some people would say a rich person sport. Now, can you just highlight that and talk around that point to the listeners about how sort of kids soccer works in Australia?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's a really difficult topic, and obviously it's a completely different culture to what we grew up with, and as I say, it is shocking sometimes when you compare the two, but sometimes it's a little bit unfair to compare the different sort of cultures. As I say, look, I think that the biggest issue, I'm sure this is the same in the US, is parents don't mind paying for things. They want the best for the kids. I want the best for my kids. I happily put money into their education or whatever it needs to be, as long as there's value being offered and there's a return of investment into the child's development and enjoyment. And I think that's the critical thing. I think that when you pay for something and you don't get what has been offered or isn't to the best standard, then obviously that's when issues sort of occur. So like you say, sometimes a program for a whole season can cost 2-3 thousands of dollars, plus you add on private coaching that people take up if they want to. So yes, look, when you break it down per session and per cost, if you compare that to other sports like gymnastics, to swimming, to tennis, it's probably comparable.
Right.
But when you come from a culture where if you are good enough, a club can support you and would basically fund your footballing education because they know that they can sell you on as an asset.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Australian transfer market is maturing. It obviously isn't quite to the level of Europe where you've got 5-6 professional clubs on a doorstep where it makes sense to develop assets and there's pros and cons to both, right? We've seen, and I'm sure there's parents listening, the sort of cut and thrust of academy football and all the negative sort of side effects of working in a horrible sort of framing of it where players become commodities and if they're not to a standard they're out, and it becomes an industry where players are assets, and we've seen that with the sort of early development centres, players being signed at sort of 5-year-olds. So look, there's a place for it, and that's completely fine. I think Australia is a completely different culture, and at the moment there isn't that top-down funding to develop the players to sell on for hundreds of thousands that then become sort of a self-fulfilling academy. So at the moment it's probably not an issue that's going to go away anytime soon. I think there is fantastic work being done by clubs and member federations across the country have to work harder to sort of levy against the governments to get more funding. Obviously, football over here is maybe second, third sport of the nation. There's AFL, there's rugby league, there's rugby union, and a lot of those sports have greater access to government funding per player than what football does. So it's a long-term project, and it's something that governments and member federations and professional clubs need to work on to have a downward pressure on fees for players. So it's not great, it's horrible sort of pill to swallow when you sort of work in the industry of football at the moment in Australia, but it's a necessity, and like I say, there are players that have a fantastic experience. Obviously not everyone can be a professional, especially in Australia when there's a country of this size. I think there's 10, 12 professional clubs, but more and more we're seeing players take up different experiences. They go to a cup and they go into Asia. They can get sort of scholarships off the back of their sort of sporting and education endeavours. So I guess that's a message that I would say to everyone listening, is that if you are a parent of a child and they are dreaming of being a football player in the UK, just really understand that the world is a big place, and the currency of football talent and the football industry doesn't have to be as a player. It can be a physio, can be a journalist, whatever. The vehicle of football can take you a long way in the world, and it can take you to different places, as I can sort of best do. So again, so when you think of it like that, if a parent is paying a fee for football development over 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 years, if their sort of end target is for their player to be a professional, then of course, like 99% of players and parents are going to feel despondent or shortchanged because their son or daughter hasn't been a professional player. But if you are using that as a vehicle to develop the person, have great experiences, go to different places. Like I say, I'm on a tournament at the moment where we've got players from across the state that have been mixed in together under care. They're experiencing living away from home for a few days, and experiences like that are fantastic. And, like in terms of development of your child, they're such sort of brilliant experiences. So it just depends how you frame it. And, if being a professional is the be all and end all, then obviously you're going to be disappointed. But if you can, be in a really good environment and take, positives out of not just the football development, athletic development, being healthy, being off the street, all these types of things, then yeah, obviously, and obviously that mirrors exactly the same sort of experiences as players in the UK when they're in the academy as well. What a fantastic environment to be in. But if you just want to be a professional, then it's going to be tough. So that you've got to take the positives along the journey as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because you say the professional bit will take care of itself. I think it is all about the experiences and the right environment and getting kids through systems and enjoying themselves. But I think you touched on a point though in regards to the Australian market maturing. I would say this summer, for instance, I've probably never seen as many players move from the A-League to different leagues around the world. Obviously, a lot come to the UK, but obviously they go to Europe. As you say, they go to Asia. You touched on a little bit, Lax, about the scholarship system. Obviously, I know from my nephew, he got a scholarship at the IGS. There's obviously... Australia's a migrant country, right? It's made up of migrants, and watching the A-League over the last few years, the Cools and those type and some of the boys that say have come through at the Mariners and places like that, there must be some kind of help for migrants along the way, because they wouldn't be getting through the system. So is it more they get a scholarship at a school and that will allow them to get into a certain club, because they're still producing, not just Australian boys. If you look at, I think there's a teen athlete sensation as well from Sudan in Brisbane that's running unbelievable 100-meter time. So is that where they would go? They would go to sort of like the private schools and get a scholarship, and that would help them with their youth soccer?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of support for low-income families or people that can't necessarily afford their football. So there's kind of two sides to it. There's the football side, that being a club going to a club for their development. Clubs help out with fees, so they do recognise if a player needs financial support, they get sponsors in, or there's different ways to support those guys, particularly member federations and the professional clubs that have got academies. They certainly do that. I think Adelaide United and South Australia do a fantastic job of developing players. They've just sold Nesta to Bayern Munich, I think, and that's a great story, like a fantastic example of a player that was supported. He got into a great pathway with fantastic coaches, and had hopefully will have a fantastic career in the game. So there are avenues. It is, like you say, it's a fee-paying sport, so it does mean that it becomes a bit of more of a middle-class sport. However, there is a lot of focus to make sure that players from communities and church league and that's, to be honest, that's where you see a lot of talent, like you say, migrant communities in sort of Sydney and Melbourne, where you have communities of Italian or Turkish or wherever it may be. That's real like a hotbed of talent, and it's a very difficult thing for talent ID in Australia. Like I say, the size of the country, the amount of sort of people in football leadership positions have to do a lot of work outside of that takes them away from the grass and the talent ID and things like that. So it is a daunting task, but really tapping into those communities is a hotbed of talent. So yeah, they do a good job of supporting those types of players, and particularly in regional areas where there might not be developed sort of talent programs. Finding those diamonds in the rough is common practice in regional areas as well.
So just scraping it back to the start, Lex, thanks for that point. as I say, me and you done it the other way around. But how did you come to play in Australia? Like, what was the process? I know obviously there's a lot more pathways now than when I think I went in 1998. It's a long time ago. It was pretty much through word of mouth and getting something set up and a few emails. But how did you go about to go over to Australia and start playing football?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it came from my coaching experience in academy football in the UK. I was a scholar at Orient, and we can come on to that in a bit, but sort of the football playing side. But I was a scholar at Leyton Orient, and following a few years there, excuse me, I then moved to Dagenham and Redbridge. I was sort of a reserve player, sort of training full time, and sort of realising that a career as a player wasn't going to quite happen. So during that time, I went to university, studied at the University of East London. I actually had the opportunity to go to America and do university out there. I did the trials, had a fantastic trial, did the exams, and actually got offers. But for some reason, I decided that Stratford was a bit more a better option than Florida. But for whatever reason, I stayed at home, bit of a homeboy at the time, and got into coaching a little bit more seriously. So when I was a scholar at Orient, I started to dip my toe in. I was an academy coach at Leyton Orient under Gary Carser, was the academy director there. So while I was a scholar and like a few years after, I was in the academy. And that was a fantastic experience. And obviously, a bit like yourself, love the game, want to be around it all the time. So if it wasn't playing, then obviously coaching was the route that I wanted to go down. So I was at Leyton Orient in their academy. I followed Gary to Wycombe Wanderers and coached over there, which was sort of a hard few years in terms of travel. So I'm obviously originally from West Essex, East London. So that was a bit of a journey travelling all the way around to Wycombe, sort of 2-3 nights a week. But it was a great sort of experience in terms of working with some fantastic sort of people and some great players. Whilst I was there, they closed their academy, which was a real a bad moment to go through and having to sit in a room full of players and scholars and sort of hear or see them receive that news that the academy was closing. I mean, it was bad enough for the academy age players, but obviously scholars being told that they're scholars one moment and then not the next was tough and difficult. But obviously the club had their reasons and they needed to do it at the time. So from Wycombe, then moved to Watford, just working with the juniors, like the real younger ones in the foundation phase, and that was like really where I started to pick up even more sort of in-depth knowledge, more so like sort of structurally, and seeing the bigger picture of things about the academy of that size and sort of recruitment. And at the time they worked with a school to have their sort of players in and around their education. So it was there when I was at Watford. I worked with a guy that had a contact out in Australia. And what would happen in the school holidays in Australia, they would ask some of these guys, these Watford coaches, to come out and help do some kids camps, like, just holiday camps for people to do in the half term. And one year I was lucky enough to be asked to come out and do it with some of the coaches and did that for 2 week time and came to Brisbane and loved it. The kids were great, fantastic sort of standard, and had a great little holiday while I was coaching, and I was, really, really impressed. And then that sort of carried on for a few years. So I did that sort of 3 years consecutively in the June, July holidays out in Brisbane. And it was in the third year that one of the guys that was running the school holidays, Paul Edwards, fantastic guy, he asked if I wanted to come out and play for the following season in Brisbane. And at the time I was in a job that was sort of, I wanted to leave. It was a great experience, but wanted to sort of change a little bit, and the stars aligned. These things sort of happen for a reason sometimes, and things made it clear that this would be a great chance to just come out and have a great experience of just finishing off playing, and not real too much thought behind it. It was just a working holiday visa, which means that you don't necessarily get the full working rights, and it's not too serious, but you can come out and just experience the country. And at that time, I was family friend Billy Lumley, goalkeeper and sort of non-league, is a fantastic goalkeeper. His brother's doing really good as well, as a professional at the moment for Southampton. And asked Bill if he wanted to come out as well and sort of do the year playing. And to be fair to Bill, he's had a fantastic time out here as well. He's had a similar route to myself. He's met his partner, got a little girl, and he's doing some fantastic things with a goalkeeper academy over here in Brisbane. So we had a similar journey, and that year playing for Mitchelton Football Club was fantastic. Our team was full of Aussie lads that were absolutely superb and so welcoming, and then we had some Americans, some Canadians, and it was just absolutely brilliant. We had a really good season. Like, team spirit was amazing because we were all like in the same boat, and we really played hard and worked hard. Like, it was a fantastic year. And then when that year was coming to an end, wanted to stay and sort of really see what I could do and sort of kick on with football in a different country. And that was where I got in touch with Brisbane City, and there were some fantastic coaches there that helped me get the role, which really, really grateful for. And that club was a really good experience as well, and my first sort of leadership position in football, and we had some fantastic staff. I think in my tenure we had 50 players that moved on to the Brisbane Roar Academy. We've had a Joey's captain that's an under-17 national team captain that came from our club. So we had some really good success. Very proud of the friendships I've made at that club and the sort of development that we had. So yeah, that's a bit of a snapshot of my journey, I guess. But if there's anything that I sort of would look back on, or any messages for any player that are sort of 20, 21, playing around non-league, or just had some bad news from professional club and sort of dropped out the professional game, is just get your eyes open, take your blinkers off, and see the world as a big football place. And some of the experiences, if you're brave enough and willing to make that step into the unknown, it can be tough. Like the first 6 months is a bit scary, and you're on your own a little bit, and you've got to build a community. But if you're a decent player, and you played at a good level, then places like Australia or Scandinavia or America, the world's your oyster. So I think if anyone's sort of debating it for themselves or their kids, just give it a go, because you can always sort of come back. The UK is not going anywhere. The non-league clubs are not going anywhere. You can always come back to it. So that's kind of one message I'd say to any young sort of player that's just had some bad news is, the professional game in England is great. And like, even being over here since 2015 and sort of seeing how much the game has grown, sort of conference south, conference north, like some of the things these clubs are doing is so good. It's brilliant. Like the game's developing, but the equivalent of what you could do in a different country, is probably ahead. You can really set yourself up and have a good couple of years. And I'm sure you agree, Christian, like you've had, the same sort of experiences, and some of the memories you've had from playing overseas, and sort of the character development you go through is, it's brilliant.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I don't think you could have summarised that any better. I always, part of one of my other roles was trying to get boys to go and play in the Nordics, or going to play abroad. Is as I say, the football will always take care of itself. But I remember leaving the UK as a 19-year-old, and I would say that made me the person that I am today. Like, you leave, especially at a younger age, the world's you look at it as a big bad place. You might be living at home, very dependent on other people, and it makes you as a person. As I say, it gives you a lot of transferable skills, and the football will take care of itself. But just to live your life and experience new experiences and new places and new people, I just think it's one of those things that if you ever get the chance, as you say, like you've got to go and do it, because England will always be there for you, but there's so much more out there. So I think that's a great point. Lax, you said you was playing for a team. What level was that when you come over?
Yeah, so in Australia you have the professional league, which is the A League, and then below that, if you want to call it sort of below that, within each state. So Queensland is a state of Australia. There's like a state league, and that's called the National Premier League, and that is kind of like the second division, if you want to call it that. And then below that, at the time that I came out, there was a league called the Brisbane Premier League. So a league that was how can I describe it? It was like if England was the National League, London would have been the Brisbane Premier League. So it was a bit more localised, regionalised, but there was the difference at that time was that the Brisbane League, or the third league, could have more visa players, more overseas players. Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily a lower standard. I would argue that, at the time there was some teams that were probably equivalent or better than teams in the league above, but there was a big difference in the number of overseas players that you could have. So we had some, like as I say, we had Americans, we had Canadians, we had I think we had a French player at the time as well, and yeah, so that was fantastic, really, like seeing all those sort of different cultures sort of come into it. So it's hard, really, because you can't really sort of do it like the step system in the UK. It was kind of, because it's so big, and the differences between different states, like you couldn't say that, a League 3 was the same League 3 standard in a different state, because the differences are absolutely massive in the equivalent. So yeah, it was kind of like the second or third division, but we trained in the evening still. It wasn't quite full time during the day, but it was sort of three or four sessions across the week, and then a game on the weekend. And the big thing was obviously travel. So sometimes you travel for like 2.5 hours. I know sometimes you do that in the league now and again, but that was kind of a bit more regular. So you'd have weekends away and things like that. So yeah, it was good. It was a great experience. It was fantastic.